August 29th, 1952, Woodstock, New York, Maverick Concert Hall. David Tudor stepped on the stage in front of the expecting audience. They were here to enjoy a piece by the famous avant-garde composer John Cage. 433 composition, a piece that took him 5 years to compose. On the same night, the piece would become his most notorious piece, but not in the ways you would expect. Instead, it had people all wondering, was this a prank? Is this even music? Tudor sat down at the piano, pulled out a tiny stopwatch, closed the lid, and set it aside. For 4.5 minutes, he would sit there in pure silence. Not a single note. Hands on his lap. Just nothing. Nothing. Nothing at all. What was going on? The tension grew thick. The concert hall was stuffy. You could hear the nerves fidgeting, the uncontrollable giggles and coughs, and people shifting and rustling in their seats. It was a warm and rainy evening in Woodstock, so you could hear the rain pitter-pattering on the rooftops, the wind blowing in the trees, and the crickets chirping. To the audience, this was just ambient noise. But for Cage, these seemingly weird sounds were part of his manuscript. To this day, whether it served as an ongoing joke or a topic of a heated musical debate, John Cage's 433 composition has had a profound impact in music and a legacy that endures to this day. John Cage was a pioneer of the avant-garde movement in the contemporary era and was one of the most influential composers of the 20th century. His whole life would be dedicated to experimenting with sound. He was known for his use of a prepared piano, in which he would place bolts, screws, rubber erasers, and other objects to create more muted and sharper sounds that would enhance his pieces. Cage preached that true silence does not exist. Any combination of sound is music. There's always something to see, something to hear. 433 is always played by the audience and the environment. It is present in every way, shape, or form. It is the song of life. The piece had 3 movements, all with an instruction of not making any sound. On the manuscript, there will be instructions reading Movement 1, tacit. Movement 2, tacit. Movement 3, tacit. Basically, tacit meaning to not make a sound. What makes this piece so naturally controversial? I mean, first of all, no one has ever thought of a silent piece. No one had ever thought of composing a silent piece before. They were scared of not being taken seriously. Even Cage himself thought this piece would be thought as a joke. He made it to have no sound because he thought that music should be free of the feelings and ideas of the composer. He wanted to give the audience this creation, this thought process, and the ideas. No 2 performances are ever the same. It makes it the most experimental piece ever. But when do you draw the line? When do you stop? No composer has ever written a piece without moving their pen. I mean, it's absurd. Was this just a form of laziness? Where did the heart-wrenching melodies of the Romantic era go? Centuries of the development of music just so Cage can hand musicians a plain sheet of printer paper? Shouldn't music always have intention behind it? Cage once said, "I love sounds, just as they are, and I do not need them to be anything more than what they are." He believed that the random melodies we hear, the birds chirping in the early morning, the noises of ongoing traffic had aesthetic qualities. They were blurred out when people strive and to recreate the traditional, conventional standard of what is music, what sounds nice, and what people thought of as beauty. Cage aimed to separate the composer's, quote, ego from the piece. The work shouldn't have anything to do with him. So what inspired him? What inspired him to create such a piece? So Cage was inspired by a lot of things. He was always known to be radical, first of all. People literally wrote in his high school yearbook, noted for being radical. He was in a long-term relationship with Merce Cunningham that lasted most of his lifetime. Merce Cunningham was a contemporary choreographer. Cunningham incorporated chant in his ballets, and his dancers would utilize their torsos bending sideways, forwards, and backwards and hold balance for long periods of time. Cunningham would also kind of make up choreography to Cage's music. Usually it was all percussion, and it would just fit perfectly with the precise and jaggy moves. Merce's choreography was similar to ballet, but it also completely separated emotion from dance. His moves were almost robotic, and by inviting chance in his dance, he would accept uncertainty. And that just beautifully fits in with Cage's philosophy as well, accepting uncertainty, just like in 433. The anechoic chamber is a room where there's like no sound. It's the quietest place on earth. It is almost silent. When he visited the anechoic chamber in Harvard University, he was able to hear two sounds, a high sound and a low sound. When he was like asking the person like, "Oh, what do these sound?" And he told him, the high sound is the sound of his nervous system at work. The low sound is the sound of his blood circulating. He basically, but while he was in this chamber, kind of got to hear his own piece before even composing it. Perhaps that kind of inspired him to be like, wow, so silence truly never exists. Even in the most quietest chamber in the world, we are never alone in this world. We always have sound around us. American painter Robert Rauschenberg created a piece called The White Paintings. And they appear to be a blank canvas, like polar bear and snow, they would say. But Rauschenberg said that they were not blank. They were airports for light, shadows, particles that reflected atmospheric changes in the room. These paintings were created in 1951, a year before Cage released his own piece, and they were a huge inspiration for him. It is said that human ears have a cat-like vulnerability to unfamiliar sounds. In museums and galleries, we are free to move around and turn away from what bewilders us, but in a concert hall, we are trapped in this uneasy feeling. Professor Julian Dodd argued that Cage's composition is not music, yet it is a witty work of conceptual art. Professor Dodd believed that music is only music if composers give a set of instructions controlling players what sound to produce. Some people also think that he did it for money, that it was a trick, it was a hoax, but Cage was not commissioned to write this, so he didn't get money for this idea. I mean, no one wants to commission a silent piece, okay? But wouldn't that be too risky? How can you make sure people want to buy a piece that is literally silent? But some say that this piece is simply misunderstood. If you ask Cage, he'll say this piece, specifically the premiere, went along the lines of this. You could hear the wind stirring outside during the first movement. During the second, raindrops began pattering on the roof. And during the third, the people themselves made all kinds of interesting noise as they talked or walked out. He himself said it would be his most important work. But if it was a joke, no one would say, he wouldn't say that it was his most important work if it was actually a joke, right? A lot of people also support Cage. They believe this piece to be groundbreaking, a piece of art that encourages people to reflect on their own surroundings, and how this piece is the most pivotal piece of the century. A silent piece. They broke free from the traditional expectations of music. Indeed, it had a great influence on modernist music. It would inspire many, many modern composers today. It would lead to an explosion of composers experimenting with sound, creating and playing around with it. So there's a lot of special interpretations of the piece. It can be a single performer, a whole orchestra, a rock band. I once saw a Zoom meeting performance of 433. There's infinite ways to play this piece. It's silent, so I guess you could just play it anywhere, any way you want. But I recommend, in your free time, go set a timer, first for 33 seconds, the first movement, then 2 minutes and 40, the second movement, and then 1 minute and 20 seconds long. Notice what you feel. Notice every part of your surroundings, the ringing in your ear, anything. In today's world, we are constantly bombarded with stimuli. Every day is work, work, work. With the rise of social media, we are in desperate need of just silence. Pure, good old silence. So what do you think? Where do you think we should draw the line between music and nonsense? Is 433 even music? Thank you so much for joining me on this journey through John Cage's most controversial piece, 433. Have a wonderful day, and I'll see you next time. Bye.